right, well, let's jump into Proverbs 3 today. I think we'll be able to get through this chapter. This is kind of one of those Hall of Fame chapters. It's got some verses that we've heard our whole lives and really have made an impact. I know on me, I'm sure on you as well. And these tie into several other verses that are very well-known verses also. But he's continuing, he meaning Solomon, is continuing to kind of bestow his knowledge and wisdom himself upon, he's referring to his son again. He starts off chapter 2, my son, if you will receive my words and hide my commandments. Chapter 3 is my son, forget not my law. So he's continuing along these lines of someone who needs to receive this. And what was one of the things that stuck out to you, could be various things, for chapter 2 that we talked about last week? Anything that kind of...
There was a lot of stuff in that chapter.
There was a lot of stuff.
It was.
The action words is kind of what got me. There's so many deliberate things that we as believers should do. Receive, we look at chapter 2, starting verse 1, receive, hide. Verse 2, incline, apply, cry after knowledge in verse 3, lift up your voice in verse 3, seek out. And this doesn't go away in this chapter. There's still a lot of the same type of action words that we see starting in verse 1. He says, my son, forget not my law. So it's always something that we should keep in the forefront of our thoughts, be intentional in following the law, of applying the law. And I love how it's written in the rest of verse 1. It says, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. It's not just a deed thing. It doesn't just say, but keep my commandments. He says, let your heart keep my commandments. What does that mean to you?
Part of your being.
Yeah, it's part of who you are, how you think.
Deeper than just a head.
Yeah, deeper than a head knowledge than just an active, this is what I do. It's who you are. It's part of you.
And one of the things that stands out to me is that wisdom. We're talking about wisdom, and it needs to be sought. You got to go look for it. It's not going to drop in.
Yeah, it's not going to encroach on you. I love Revelation 3, 20, I think, where it says, Jesus says, he's speaking there, says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him, and he will sup with me, and I with him. It's an action. He's not going to kick down the door of our life and force us to become a Christian, or force us to do anything. It's something that's our choice that we have to seek after. We see that in verse 4 of chapter 2, and we see it again in this chapter. To actively pursue this thing called wisdom and knowledge. Verse 2 is an interesting verse. It says, for length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. So let's look at what is they. Because y'all want length of days and long life and peace and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah. Discipline.
Do what?
Discipline.
Well, they, I think, goes back to verse 1 of keeping his commandments.
Yeah.
If we'll do this, if we'll live. What is, Bill mentioned this a week or so ago, Exodus 20, is that where the 10 Commandments are, I believe?
I was just going to say, is he referring to his law personally, or is he referring to the law of God?
Well, he is teaching about, it's implied that what he's teaching his son, or whoever chooses to listen, are God's commandments, but they're also his commandments. It's not just a fatherly thing.
He says in there too, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
This beginning of wisdom, exactly. But if we go to Exodus 20, I believe I'm going in the right place.
Yeah.
We find the 10 Commandments. And if we look at Commandments 5, there it is. Bill mentioned this, that it's a commandment of honoring your father and mother. Because Jesus referred to this commandment, said, for this is the first commandment, or this is the first commandment with promise. What's the promise? We go back and read it. It says, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So this is kind of a comforting thing, in that if we'll do the commandments of God, if we'll follow them the way we should, I mean, I guess there's no guarantee, but it does seem to be those who are very faithful to the Lord seem to have a long, prosperous, peaceful, at least, life. You know, Arthur comes to mind. You know, he's 95 years old.
Well, is there a scripture that refers to if you don't, then your life will be shortened, or if there's certain...
There is, I don't know exactly where that's at, but there is a passage in there that basically if you live righteously in your own life, that your days could be shortened. That is in that. Does anybody know where that's at off the top of their head? I do know, I've read that before. But that's kind of an interesting kind of perspective is, wow, if I do what I'm supposed to do, then there may be hope that I'll have a long, prosperous life. And, you know, that is the first commandment with promise that's talked about. There's another passage of Scripture that says, I think it's in John, let me search it up right quick, that we can know, that we know God by keeping His commandments. Let's see if I can find this. This is one of the writings of John. If it'll pull it up here, let's see. You know, a lot of people say, well, how can you know for sure that you're saved? Well, this passage kind of gives an interesting twist. Well, in John 14, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's a pretty good one. John 14:21, he that keep my commandments and keepeth them, he it is that loveth me, and he that loveth me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him and will manifest myself to him. John 15, if you keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments. Yeah, there it is. 1 John 2:3. It's really good. Hereby we do know that we know him if we keep his commandments. That's 1 John chapter 2, verse 3. And then 1 John 2:4, I love this one. He that saith, I know him, and keep not his commandments, he is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So there's pretty obvious evidence. If you keep God's commandments, that there's evidence there. Now, it's not a works-based salvation. We got to be careful with that. I think it goes back to what he says in verse 1, of let your heart keep my commandments. Just letting it be something you truly believe in, something that is a part of you as you live your daily life.
So the fruits are shown.
Right, the fruits are shown, and that's evidence of what you truly have put your faith and trust in and what you believe in.
You know, though, I'm confessing here, but you raise up in a Christian home and you've done something all your life. How much of it is
Sure.
routine?
Sure.
Things that you know that you're supposed to do as opposed to,
Right.
you know, that creeps in sometimes.
It does,
Yeah,
absolutely
it
it does. And that, you know, that was part of the Jewish issue. You know, they were just, well, we keep these commandments and we're fine. You know, we do these things. Catholicism is all about that. I mean, literally, they believe you can live your life any way you want to, as long as you go to confession.
Hmm.
And then you're right with God every week or whenever it is you go, and then you're fine, even though you live however you want to live. And we know that's not a biblical, you know, attitude to have type thing. But yeah, some of it does become habit, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, if the worst habits we have are following God's commandments, then I think it's a pretty good achievement. But that's an interesting one. He mentions here in verse 2, mentioning that your length of days and long life and peace will be added to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Here's some more action words. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. We read about that a little bit in, what was it, Romans 3, where he says that the law of God is written upon our hearts via our conscience. So that's how he can reach everyone, because that's instilled in every human being. But here, this is more of an active thing where we study it, we apply it, and we ourselves write it in our heart as if this is something important to us. Now, when I study the Bible, I tend to underline and circle things and maybe write notes in there. Why do we do that? To help remember, right?
Well, and to how it applied to you at that time.
Right. Sure, it could be a mental note of this is what it means in this moment right now in my life. But as we're writing things, it's because it means something to us. And this is kind of a neat spin on write these upon our heart so that they will stick, maybe remind you later of things to come. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men, right? Or man, it says. So we see this, and we'll see it again about, and we've read it already, about God's commandments being as an ornament around our neck and something that we wear proudly, like a tie. What is that all about? An ornament that we wear, grace around your neck. I mean, what was he talking about? I think this verse ties into it. What do people see?
Hang on to it. Whatever.
Well, hang on to it. What do people see when they look at us?
Yeah.
That's what's important.
Right. What's outwardly? Well, if we live our lives as if we're carrying God's glory and grace outwardly, as if it's a big necklace or a crown or something that people are going to look at, what better thing to show them than God in our life? I think that's what he's really kind of getting there. That it says that we will have good understanding not only in the sight of God, but also in the sight of man. That's important for us to understand, because what is everybody seeking? Even these teens we're talking about with the, the whatever you call it, what is it? LGBT, ABC, whatever it is. Especially this movement, they're searching for some kind of truth. To the point now they're just making up their own truth and trying to believe in something.
I refer to that as alphabetic foolishness.
Alphabetic foolishness. They're searching for something because they know there's something out there. And if we will show them something real, and what's the best way that we can demonstrate that God is real to them, to convey to them that God is real? What should we first do?
Have a godly life as your first.
Present to them that God is real to us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we live what we say, because that's always the first attack. Well, y'all do this, or I've seen you do this, or I heard you say this, and all that sort of stuff. They'll attack our character. What do they do with God? They pick and try to poke holes in the Bible, and I've heard all kinds of arguments against God. God is a narcissistic, egotistical, genocidal. They come up with everything. They wiped all those people out in Sodom and Gomorrah. How can you follow a God that just wipes out societies of people and all this sort of stuff? And they take it in the wrong context, but they use it as ammunition against believing, and they'll do the same thing with us if we're not careful.
They're doing what Adam and Eve did wrong. They're trying to
Exactly.
use their own understanding. And
Exactly.
The Bible tells you clearly that not to do that.
Yeah, we're getting ready to get
Don't
there.
go with your own understanding.
God blocked out the sin.
Depend and trust in
God
God.
blocked out the sin that just happened to people within it.
Absolutely. And atheists especially will say, well, I look around, and if this is what God created, why would I want to have anything to do with him? And
He created you too, dude.
yeah, that's one way to look at it. But what I always try to stress to them is, well, what you see today is not how God created it. He created everything perfect. Sin came into the world, then tainted and corrupted everything, and what you see are the after effects of what sin does to creation. Therefore, don't blame God, which is kind of the push for that book I wrote, Don't Blame God, but note where the blame should go, which is ultimately on ourselves and our choices. if we choose to sin or choose to seek the Savior. It's
Nobody
basically your
wants to
two
take
options.
responsibility of their own choices. themselves.
Right, and we're not teaching kids to
That
do
word
that,
gone.
and young
That
adults.
was gone.
The whole concept of accountability and responsibility is just kind of gone out the window, unfortunately.
The next verse is one of my favorites, and it tells you the thing you should give
Absolutely,
back to those people.
absolutely.
Don't trust in your own
It says,
understanding.
trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not to thine own understanding. That's one of those Hall of Fame verses right there that we've heard. And definitely something that we should apply and encourage others, you know. Because a lot of people say, well, the way I see it, or the way I understand it, and some Christians do that, you know. And the Bible tells us clearly, don't do that, but to trust God, trust in the Lord. Here we use that word heart again, with all thine heart. He's already mentioned to write his commandments and keep his commandments in our heart. Verse 3, he says, write them in the table of thy heart. And now he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lead not to our own understanding. And all thy ways, not just some, but all thy ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. This is a big one the whole LGBT movement is missing, especially those who claim that they're believers and gay at the same time, and living those kinds of lifestyles at the same time. It says if we'll acknowledge him in all areas of our life, he will direct our paths. He will show us how to live. He will show us the ways to go. And for someone to claim to be a born-again believer, yet their life doesn't reflect that they're even aware of God's commandments, let alone following them, there's an issue there. Verse 7, be not wise in thine own eyes. That's a big one. Don't think like you know everything, that you've got it all figured out. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. Again, these are some action words that we are to actively do. It shall be, if we'll do this thing he's just said, it shall be health to thy navel and marrow to thy bones. What does that mean? Health to your navel.
Well, it says Bible translation flesh.
Your flesh, okay. And navel's kind of the core of, you know, your health and your status. So that
Mine
makes
says
sense.
your body
Your body,
and nourishment to your bones.
nourishment, marrow. So the things that we need to live, to survive, right? That God will be these things. And it says, it shall be health. What is it?
The fear of the Lord.
Fear of the Lord, of leaning on him, not leaning on us. It's kind of a bundle of things, I think, that has just been talked about there. Is it shall be health to your body, or navel, King James says, and marrow to your bones. If you don't have marrow in your bones, you're in trouble. That
Can't
means
make
you're
blood.
probably dead. So, and then verse 9, here we get into some things where we can reference other places in the Bible. Well, probably could in all these, but these kind of stuck out to me. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. Where do we go with that?
Put him first.
A lot of people tie that into tithing. There are 30 references in the Bible to the word first fruits. 30 references. 23 of those are in the Old Testament and 7 are in the New Testament. We could look at them, but it would take probably another whole lesson to do that. But it speaks of Jesus Christ being the first fruits. That he was the first to resurrect, and then ascend to heaven as the first fruits. He led captivity captive. The way it makes sense to me, this was a question asked of a young pastor during his ordination. I'm glad he didn't ask me that one. This tough one. He said, how did the people of the Old Testament get saved? That was the question. This guy was like 20-something. And they asked him this question, how did the people of the Old Testament get saved?
Well, there was a certain bunch of them that didn't.
Well, true.
If you look at-
But of the ones who were believers in something, how did they get saved before Jesus?
I didn't have a promise of a Savior.
The promise of the coming Messiah. They had faith in God. What does it say about Abraham? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Now our righteousness is not through our deeds or nothing; it's through Christ. You know, it says that He was made to be sin, so that we could be made the righteousness of God in Him. So the people from the Old Testament, the answer they came to this guy, and it's pretty impressive. He said, "Well," said, "here we are on this side of the cross, and we look back to the cross for our salvation." People of the Old Testament were looking forward to it. It's kind of how he put it. I was like, that's pretty cool. Good answer. And that's what they were doing. They knew a Messiah was coming. Just like the Jews today still believe that a Messiah is coming. They think he hasn't come yet. You know, you talk to them today on the streets in 2024, I see interviews all the time. They still don't think Jesus was a Messiah. They think he hasn't shown up yet. But they're still looking for someone to come. They're still looking ahead into the future. Of course, we know that he already came. But the word first fruits there is a description of Christ, and that he came and did things that we were unable to do so that he might be made the first fruits. And there's all types of other verses that mention the first fruits are the best. You know, if you go gather a crop, that you're not to give God the leftovers or the stuff you don't want, you're to give him the best of that. You know, when they sacrificed lambs, they had to be of a certain criteria, perfect, without blemish, nothing wrong with them at all. You know, a lot of people would probably pick the one that they wanted the least, and that's not what God asked for. He asked for the best, and that's another indication of the first fruits. And it says to honor God with your substance, the things that we have, with the first fruits, or the best of it, of all your increase. So an increase is anything that you gain. Financially, we tie that in there. But it could be time, it could be talent, it could be anything that we have in our life that God has given us. You know, artists who sing, you know, they should sing for God first. We don't see a lot of that. We see it in the Christian industry, but we'll see a lot of secular artists that say they're believers, but then they write songs about beer drinking and running around and carrying on and all that sort of stuff. You know, there's an issue there, I think, and that's why, what was his name? It just said, Granger Smith is his name. He starred in a movie called Moonrise, and he's been a country singer for a long time, decades, and he finally, it just convicted him to the point that he gave it up, and now he's a preacher. He just said, I'm done with being a country music artist, I'm going to be a servant of the Lord, and he quit his country career, and he's now serving as a pastor in a church, and he does a podcast. He talks to people about godly living. And that's a good example where he's taking the talents that God gave him and putting God first in those talents as he's now moving forward in his life. And he's been through a lot of stuff, but he uses that as a ministry opportunity. But that's something that ties into a lot of different verses. The thought continues in verse 10. It says, so shall thy barns be filled with plenty. So if we'll do this, if we'll put God first, the promise, if you want to call it that there, is that their blessings will come. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. We can go to Malachi on this one, chapter 3, in verse 10. This is the big verse of the Old Testament a lot of people go to regarding tithing. And I've heard many messages, videos, sermons that tithing is not a New Testament teaching. And I don't know that it necessarily is, but I still don't think that it's a bad thing. You know, we talked about that a week or so ago, that God loves a cheerful giver. Not to give begrudgingly, but give with a cheerful heart, I think. So we still obviously should give. And I don't think the Old Testament is null and void just because we're now in the New Testament era. But Malachi 3:10 says, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house." God's speaking there. "And prove me," he basically like, "I double dog dare you to do this. Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough for you to even receive it." I mean, that's pretty big. And so this verse certainly ties into that, of giving to God, give the best that we have to the Lord and all these sorts of things. Verses 11 and 12 then shifts thoughts a little bit. It says, "My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth." And I know I didn't really understand this as a kid, and I'm sure my kids don't fully understand this either. But there's benefit in correcting your children. Discipline should be a thing. You know, we've now got into the place in our culture where the kids are calling the shots. And the doctors are saying, I mean, I've heard it probably through some of this stuff that you were talking about. And, you know, doctors saying, you should listen to your kids, and if your kids say this is going on, then you should believe them, and you should get them their gender-affirming care and all this sort of stuff. If they feel like they're not who they were born as, you need to pay attention to that and listen to that. You know, when I was a kid, if you said something like that, you get smacked across the face. And then you get the belt and you got home. You know, it's like, you're wrong. This is the way it is. Straighten up and listen up, kind of thing. We don't see that much anymore. I've seen it throughout my lifetime, the shift of kids, you know, should be seen and not heard kind of thing, to the kids tell the parents what's going on. And now they're trying to tell the teachers what's going on.
And they can sue the parents.
And they can sue the parents or even divorce their parents, and you know, all these crazy sorts of things. And there's another place in the Bible, it's Hebrews 12:6, that this ties into as well. So here's the Old Testament. It says again, "Despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth." In the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 12 verse 6 says, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth." You know, that word scourging, that's what happened. Yeah, that's what happened to Jesus, and he nearly got beat half to death before he went to the cross. I mean, that's a brutal thing. And he's saying that even if you go through that kind of punishment, it's for your good. It's because God loves you, and he wants you to be better. He wants you to come out of that dark place that you're in and know that God is doing this for your benefit, and that he loves you and he wants better for you. There's a lot of wisdom in that our world is lacking today. We're kind of going the other direction, unfortunately. And then we go into kind of a new phase here, where it's talking about basically wisdom is precious. It's something that we should really seek after, as Bill said earlier. It says, "Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding." You're not going to find something unless you're looking for it. You know, I mean, you might accidentally stumble across something once in a while, but for you to find something and to get something is because you're pursuing after it. You're trying to apply this thing in your life. I love these next couple of verses. Verse 14 says, "For the merchandise of it," again, what is it referring to? Finding wisdom and getting understanding. That is it. The merchandise, or the things that you can get from having that, is better than the merchandise of silver and the gain thereof of fine gold. It's like the lessons learned is more valuable than anything material you could ever buy with silver and gold. I mean, that's that much more, should be that much more valuable to the believer. She Again, she has been the personification from chapter 1 and chapter 2 of wisdom. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things thou canst desire are not to be compared to her. So all the things, what do you want out of life, Joe? What's something that you would love to have?
New bicycle,
Bicycle.
new car.
What do you want? You're getting ready to start driving. What do you probably want right now more than anything else? The car. I would love to have this Countach Lamborghini. That's always been my favorite car in the world, and they're going up in price. Guy bought a 40-year-old one about 6 months ago, paid $500,000 for it. I mean, they're just going out the roof.
It's a good investment.
Yeah, it's a good investment. That's why he bought it, because he said 2 years ago I could get one of these for half the price.
Wow.
So hopefully in 2 years from now I'll be able to sell it for twice the price. So that's why he bought it, to kind of put his money in something he can resell.
So it says, wisdom
Is more precious
is
than
more
that.
precious than silver or gold. And the way mine translates it, blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding.
There you
For
go.
she is more profitable than silver and yields better in returns than gold.
Yeah, even
You'll get more out of
the greatest stuff that we can think of in this life that we could get, it doesn't even come close to the value and the wealth that wisdom should be and can be in our life. Verse 16, here we go with the length of days again. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. So again, there's something to be said for godly living. Her ways, meaning wisdom, are ways of pleasantness, and her paths are peace. She, wisdom again, is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. Again, definitely something that sounds like we should want to pursue and want to seek after and want to hold on to. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth. That's pretty profound. By wisdom founded the earth, and by understanding hath established the heavens. Any thoughts on that?
And God is wisdom, and God created the earth and the heavens.
That's why I don't question anything about the universe.
Right.
I know he put it there.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not huge on the science, but I know if the earth was 1 or 2 degrees in either direction tilted on its axis, we'd all die. We'd either burn up or freeze to death. If we were a little too close, a little bit closer to the sun, we couldn't live. A little bit farther away, we couldn't live. And God, in His wisdom, put everything exactly as it is. The moon is important. It controls the tides of the water, which affects the ocean life, which affects our life, because a lot of our food comes from the water. I mean, the way He designed it all is just
That's why I can't understand why anyone would believe that it just
happened by accident. Exactly. And where did the stuff come from that happened by accident? They can't ever explain that. It eventually goes back to something eternal. So you're going to believe in something randomly eternal, or something intelligent and wise and full of understanding eternal. I think that's the better option, in my personal opinion. By His knowledge, the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down the dew. I mean, the whole, what is that called? Photosynthesis. The whole process of that. Even in the design of, what do we live off of? Oxygen, right? Water and oxygen. We can't breathe without oxygen. What do the plants live off of? Carbon dioxide, and that's what we breathe out. How does that happen? We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out a different element. I mean, who could come up with that if that was all random? That's a design issue. God certainly knew exactly what He was doing. His knowledge, His understanding, His wisdom. My son, verse 21 says, let not them depart from thine eyes, meaning all the things we see, all the stuff we can't understand about God. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. And we've seen that word more than once throughout our study. So shall they be, here we go with the visuals, life unto your soul and grace unto your neck. Something that should be present, something that should be visible, something that can benefit you. Then shalt thou walk, in action words here, in the way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble, if we'll use discernment, if we use this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. When you liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down and shalt sleep, and thy sleep shall be sweet. That's pretty comforting. And I can attest to that. You know, as we live our lives for God, I do tend to sleep better at night. There have been times in my life where I was all over the place and I didn't sleep too well. And you talk to people who live, you know, these ridiculous, rebellious lives, most of them say, I sleep with one eye open. You know, they're scared, or wondering if the cops are going to show up, or, you know, when somebody's going to come in and try to kill them, and all these sorts of things.
At our age, all sleep is sweet.
Right. So living for God has certainly got its major benefits. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked when it cometh. I like it says when it cometh, not if, but when it cometh. You know, I see terrible things and judgmental things happen to people who probably deserve it. You know, and like I see, you know, police will raid a house and bust a drug dealer, and I will not name names, but someone was escorted out of Joy's workplace the other day in handcuffs. That was above her. You know, you see stuff like that, and you're like, oh. But this says, don't let that put fear in our heart. You know, because if you're not doing that sort of thing, then you can sleep well. You don't have to fear these things. You don't have to worry about God doing that to you, because you're following His law, and He's there on your side. For the Lord shall be your confidence, and shall keep your foot from being taken. You know, if we live our lives firmly planted in God's commandments and in His will for our life, what's that verse say? If God be for us, who can be against us, right? Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, and when it is in the power of your hand to do it. Say not unto your neighbor, go and come again, and tomorrow I will give, when thou hast it by thee. Jesus talked about this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. We've got a couple of minutes. Let's jump over there. This is a Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 42. He says, give to them that ask thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. This kind of goes back to the two great commandments. Love God with all your heart, body, and soul, and love others as yourself. You know, we are supposed to love God and love others. I've seen a lot of churches use that as their motto, loving God, loving people. You know, that's the two great commandments, and that's kind of what this is tied into. And Jesus, when he quoted this, possibly he was quoting here verse 28, but he was also quoting Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 8 and 10 say the exact same thing. If we go over there and read it. So this is an Old Testament teaching, and it's something that Jesus referenced in his Sermon on the Mount as we are to work with others. And verse 29 kind of tells us why. It says, devise not evil against thy neighbor, seeing he dwelleth securely by thee. What does that mean?
Well, you are,
Don't stir
you
up.
and,
Don't stir up trouble, yeah.
you and him are neighbors. You look out for what he's got, and he looks out for what you've got. You don't want to do evil to that person.
Right.
Our neighbors say, hey, you know, your dogs are loose.
Absolutely, yeah, same in our
And
neighborhood.
we say, hey, there's somebody in your driveway we don't recognize.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
so we look out for each other.
So you look out for one another.
I would feed your dog.
And on top of that, if they're an unbeliever, let's say, again, what are they looking for? They're looking for something real and true to believe in, and in that they can dwell securely in you by trusting you And if you turn them away every time they ask for help, what's that say about God and what he means to us? That's one thing we need to keep in mind as well. I like verse 30. Strive not with a man without cause, if he have done thee no harm. You know, don't be a jerk, basically, to people just because. Envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. That's an interesting thing. Yeah, that's basically, bullying. Don't envy people who are getting their way because they're shoving everybody else out of their way. That's not the way to live. That's not what we should be looking to. 4, verse 32, who receive this word again, we saw in chapter 2 a lot. The froward is abomination to the Lord, but his secret is with the righteous. What in the world does that mean?
My Bible, the translation for the Lord detests a pervasive man who takes the upright into his confidence.
Okay.
So it's a little bit, seems a little different.
Mine says perverse.
Yeah, perverse, that's, yeah.
Okay, so mine says in verse 32, right?
Yeah.
For the froward is abomination to the Lord, but his secret is with the righteous.
Mine has secret counsel.
Okay, secret counsel is with the righteous. There's several passages that this ties into, one of them being John 7:17. John 7:17, Jesus speaking, says, if any man will do his will, meaning God's, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. See, and there's some inside information that we get directly from heaven, if we really have put our faith in him. John 15:15 says, Jesus speaking again, henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I've called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you. He's like, I'm going to be open and honest with you about everything. What do you say? Let not your heart be troubled. If these things were not so, I would have told you. He's saying that you can have an open and honest relationship with God, and not to go in froward ways, because God is not going to approve of that, and that he'll reveal to you what you need to know through your relationship with him, basically. Verse 33, 34, and 35, we already started the comparison part of this proverb in verse 32, where it says, a froward is an abomination, but his secret is with the righteous. His way, his will is revealed to those who are in the paths of righteousness. Verse 33, the curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked. Comparison, but he blesses the habitation of the just. Verse 34, surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace unto the lowly. The wise shall inherit glory, but the shame shall be the promotion of fools. There we see that word fool again. Lots of neat stuff in chapter 3. Again, just simply encouraging us, stick on the right path. There's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of things that we can have confidence in. And if we don't, well, then we got some things to worry about. Anybody got any thoughts or questions before we close out?
Great stuff.
Good stuff, absolutely. All right, well, we'll get into chapter 4 next week, so those online, we'll see you then, and I hope you all have a great week.